this, we had a technology task force that had been appointed by our town council about communication to the public. And one of the things they were evaluating with the website, guess what wasn't there for that week? So the first thing I have to do is go and do a 2-hour presentation to this group of 9 citizens about why our website failed and what we were going to do to prevent it in the future. Second piece I've got to do is I've got to give a presentation to the council about that. And I've got to write a 22-page document up that lists the chronology of what happened, what we learned, how it affected every department that was affected, how it affected our citizens and why, and then a copy of the service level agreement and everything else. It just happens that one of our council members works for Cisco. And she was very adamant that we have to document this right down to the point. I'd be glad to show you that 22-page document if you'd like to see that. Very interesting process of creating it. But one of the things it does, and I will tell you why we did that, it's actually a good thing when you recap the incident and look back at it. One of the things it does is there were areas that were affected that we didn't even realize about, particularly internal service areas that we hadn't thought about. Because there were a lot of internal service areas. Our website is set up so that our external website has links on it to make payments online, but the link actually takes you back to a payment server that sits on our network. Well, if citizens can't get to the main site, they can't get to that payment link unless they have it bookmarked. So one of the things we learned that we needed to do was put up a secondary site with at least those critical services. 40% of our building permits are processed and approved online. So, but they come, again, from a link from that main site, and if you can't get to the link and it isn't bookmarked, you don't have that. So look through your site and find out what critical services you need, and make sure that you have those ready to go back up somewhere else. The other thing that's interesting is that during the attempt to restore process, you know when you load Microsoft IIS, you get this weird looking screen that has all the languages on it? Well, I start getting phone calls about our site's been hacked. From council members, from all kinds of people, because the company had left the server online while they were bringing it back up, and the IIS screen was all it was showing. And so everybody in the town was thinking their website was hacked. So you go through a lot of things like that. Now, in the middle of that, I'm still at Nicolegiza, by the way, at the conference going through this. So I called my boss up and I said, should I come back home? And he said, no, I think you're okay. We're all right. We're doing well. So let me tell you what actually happened, and I'll tell you what we were told happened, and I'll tell you what I think happened. And this is something that will lead into one of the things we're going to talk about, is how you make sure that the services that you contract with from third parties, that people will do what they're supposed to do. And let me tell you, you'll see this on a slide a little bit later, but I want to tell you now, if a company decides not to live up to their service level agreement, I don't care how well it's written, I don't care how good it is, I don't care if it's 1 million pages, they decide not to live up to their service level agreement and their contract, you have 2 choices, leave and sue. That's it. There is nothing else you can do. Believe me, I know that. I would have done almost anything to get my website back up in that time, but I wasn't in control. They were in control. They had made a decision back several months before that was a bad decision because of a bad employee, and I will not fault the company in the sense that it was not intentional. It's one of those things where they had an employee that wasn't performing very well. This employee made a quick decision to do something as an interim basis and then never told anybody and never went back and changed it. Because at one time we were on a RAID-protected server, we were on a virtualized server, and everything was working fine. And this one employee, and they never told me this, but I read between the lines, this one employee was having problems getting the backup of the SQL files to work. They use a backup product and it wasn't getting the files correctly. So he made the decision to take the site off of that and put it on a standalone server, thinking it was a temporary solution, that he would keep us up and running while he fixed the other problem. But between the time that he put us on a separate server and he lost his job, nothing got documented. We didn't even know we were on a separate server, on basically a standalone server with no RAID protection. So, and that's our fault. I will tell you that we take responsibility for that. So those kinds of things happen. The company did not intend for that to happen. It was not in their intent at all. But I will fault the company on one other thing. They were not at all cooperative when we were trying to recover the site. They basically disowned the problem once they found out that it was their fault and they weren't probably going to be able to do anything for us. They basically said, you know, well, we're gonna dive out of here as quickly as we can. Now this is I'm not gonna mention any names. This is a national company that has been in the hosting business and still is for quite a while. They have tens of thousands of customers. So it's not somebody that's a fly-by-night that, you know, just started yesterday in the garage. They have 4 data centers nationwide. So it's not like they're one of that. We did some work on it. So what we think happened was the employee actually copied the data over temporarily, either forgot about it, but certainly didn't document it so anybody understood it, and it stayed on that server. Drive failed on the server, and our site failed. We still don't know that that's the fact. Now, there's another thing here that you need to be conscious of. If you're dealing with a third-party entity and you have problems, you have to be very careful. You're walking on thin ice, because I'm thinking to myself, first of all, I want to get my site back up, and they're the ones who are going to get my site back up, because I don't have any other hosting company standing in line, everything ready to go to put my site there. It's really going to have to go back where it was, for the time being anyway, for a temporary time. So I'm kind of walking a fine line between getting them mad at me, so that the guy goes in and says, well, I'll fix you, I'll just flip the switch. You know, we're already liable, what do we care? I'm not interested in arguing or debating at that point. I'm just interested in getting the site back up. So you're walking a fine line between trying to get them to help you get the site back up and making sure, and yet thinking in the back of your mind, boy, I'm going to be out of here as quickly as I can get another contract signed for that. So that's the kind of things that go through the process. I will tell you that our new contract is signed, and we're going to begin to transfer in 2 weeks. I thought I could do this in 30 days, for maybe 45 or so. It's taken us almost 6 months. Actually, a little longer than that altogether. It is not an easy process. It's been difficult finding a company that would give us what we want, and the reason is because I've become pretty belligerent when it comes to, I want what I want, and I can tell you exactly what I want in a hosting company, and they better give it to me or I'll go somewhere else. The last option is to build my own. I could do that. I don't like to. It's more expensive, but I will if that's when I have to. So there's some important specifics that I put in my contract. One is I want fully virtualized hardware and software. Virtualization is ubiquitous today. There's no reason why a website cannot be virtualized within a single provider or even across multiple data sources. I want to see the designated backup schedule. These are things you need to think about. It doesn't matter whether it's a website or what hosted solution you look at. You need to think about this. I want to be able to make a periodic visit, generally annually, to the facility and look and make sure that something really exists there and it's not in some guy's garage somewhere. I don't know if it's in Phoenix, Arizona. What this company's doing or what they're not. I want monthly copies of my backup that we can install and test in our data center to make sure they're backing everything up and that it works. We're also working on an alternate site with a different hosting company that has a minimum feature set in case of failure. Your website will fail. I can guarantee you it will go down at some point. You think it won't, it will. Believe me. So you need to have an alternate site that and work with your public information office or your admin department or whoever. Figure out what kinds of things are critical for the operation. All right, sometimes it's even with your elected officials, so you get everything out there that your citizens need, that at a minimum, so that you can bring a skeleton site back up and your presence is there and your citizens don't know. We went 4 days without anything, almost. It was actually about 2.5 days before we got a skeleton site back up and were able to see something. But we had citizens calling, we had council members calling. I will tell you that we did not do a terribly good job, and I say we, the organization, did not do nearly as good a job at communicating to the public, communicating to our elected officials what was going on. Because starting on Tuesday, I'm thinking it's probably a half hour. It's probably an hour. Wednesday, I'm thinking maybe 3 hours, maybe 4 hours. Friday, I'm thinking, oh God, it's going to be a month because we're going to have to recreate the whole mess. So make sure you get your site on a protected server. Ask for the ability to look at it and tell what it is. We all know enough about servers to be able to look at servers and tell if something's virtualized or not, something is done right, ask to be able to see that. Make them show you where your site is and assure you that it is in the way you want it. Make sure the vendor's backing up the site. We had restored files dozens of times on our site in the past, but we've never done a complete site restore. And we've never had to restore the 2 files that were the most critical files in the entire system. You know how a content management system works. You generally have static things like your graphics and your wraparound pages and a lot of other things, but generally the data that you're changing is in a SQL file in most content management systems, and that data is critical, and there were 2 of those MDB files that we needed that weren't there. And so make sure at least that you get that. We also today are backing up our site weekly ourselves, especially those 2 files, but anything else that changes. I'm not comfortable without having that hard drive in my office that's got that site on it. I learned that lesson very strongly as a part of that.
What are you using to back up your site?
We just basically copy down from an FTP site, just FTP it down to a local hard drive. It's a small external hard drive. It's really not as big as you think. It's only about 50 gig. It's really not a huge site. I mean, it takes a while to back it down, but we do it. We're just going to put in the time to do it. Just no other choice. And we only back up the stuff that's changed. We pretty much know the sections that have changed, and particularly those 2 key files. I mean, a lot of your static stuff, like your graphics and stuff like that, they don't change a lot. So we look to do that. We work with a company to get that set up so we can do that. Some lessons learned: test your entire site restore. Again, we've restored several parts of our site before, but never the entire site. We've never done it on a regular basis, even testing to make sure it worked. And you know, you become a little bit complacent. Everything's going well, everything's working fine. The company's really nice when you call them on the phone. If you're a couple days late on the payment, they're fine. They go, well, you know, just send it when you get it. So you get a little bit complacent with things like that. But in the end, you've got to take your own destiny into your own hands. You've got to make sure that what you do is right. So some lessons learned: do regular testing of any and all possibilities, including your entire site restore. Test with the actual backups the vendors capture. Don't let them kid you that they've tested the backups and everything's fine. Make sure you see something that assures you that that is actually taking place. I'd suggest you have a current copy of the backup in your possession. In my new contract that I signed this week, I get a copy once a month of my entire site, physically sent to my site, and I hang on to it. It goes home with me and sits beside my bed every night. So keep that in mind, that there's some things you need to do. And I mentioned earlier, any service level agreement is only as good as the company itself. And if a company decides not to live up to their agreement, your only alternative is to go somewhere else and consider leaving that. Yes, Jim?
So when you mentioned the contract, what's the difference in your new contract price compared to what you were paying? Because obviously you probably added a lot of services into it. Is it significantly different?
There's a pretty substantial difference.
There is?
Yeah. Not as much as you would think, but it is still much cheaper than I can do it myself in-house. But it went from around $700 a month to I think around $2,300.
Okay.
But you know, that's a small price to pay to sleep at night for me.
Absolutely.
And so it's not really that bad. We actually are hosting with a company who's a carry company, but they actually have their data center in Durham. They have a tier 3 data center in Durham. The company's called RM Source. They're one of the vendors here, as a matter of fact. They're actually hosting our SharePoint site as well. They actually host the City of Charlotte, Mecklenburg website, and actually developed it in SharePoint for Charlotte Mech. So they know what they're doing. But I will tell you that I have spent the last 4 months in negotiations with them. And they'll tell you I drive a hard bargain, because I learned a very important lesson in that case. That's not my first outsourcing contract. We outsource all of our employee application system to a company called NeoGov. Our entire online plans review is outsourced to a company in Tucson, Arizona, called IDT. We outsource all of our email systems to Gov Delivery. I mean, we've got a lot of outsourced contracts, cloud contracts with a lot of different agencies. I'll be reviewing all of those again fairly soon, and looking at all of those. We're looking at several other products to outsource, and we take a much more thorough look at contracts with that. I'm going to give you a link here in a minute, and if you're interested, Actually, it's from Shannon. Shannon has written a very good PDF document on cloud contracts and what you ought to include. And her document, I'm not going to go through it, but it'll have a lot of the same things I've said about it. So you want to think about that. Some additional considerations: assume your website will go down. One of the things you need to think about that we haven't really thought about is, you know, and let me talk a little bit about the climate here. In the past, when the website went down, if it was down for a day or two, it was not a terribly big deal. As long as it wasn't a council meeting week, it was okay. You know, we have become more and more to depend on our website as the vehicle to do a lot of things other than just deliver information. And I gave you an example earlier. Almost 50% of our building permits, you have to go to the website to do them. You can't walk in off the street and do them at the counter. Anything that is a fit-up or a replacement of a hot water tank or something like that, we will not take it at the counter. You have to go through the website. And we created that rule, but all of a sudden now your website becomes much more mission-critical because you've got hundreds of people out there without hot water heaters or furnaces or other things that are depending on your website to be up, and they can't get those replaced because the repairman can't get a permit to do it. So that's the kind of thing you need to think about. We hadn't really thought through that process. You know, we were still in the mode of, well, the website, people just need to go to it for information. They can't get the website, they'll call us up on the phone, everything's going to be okay. No, it's not. We have created a dependency on our technology that has put us in a position of having to deal with the mission-critical aspect of it. So you need to create a contingency plan, and you need to test it. Involve the folks who communicate, whether you have a full-time PIO office, whoever does your communication to the public, make sure you get them involved. I was amazed at their perspective. And I'll tell you where this came out. My manager asked me to do a chronology of the failure, from the very first notification until the site was back up. All the emails I got, it's about 8 or 10 pages. All the emails I got, the time I got them, what I did after that, who I notified, who I talked to, blah, 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 on and on. He also asked the Public Information Office to do that. You know what, everything agreed as far as time and date. There's a huge difference in perspective. You know, what I thought was important wasn't necessarily so important to the PIO office. But there were a lot of things that were very critical and very important to the PIO office and the public and the council that I hadn't really thought about being important. So you need to think about that, and that's one of the reasons for creating that contingency plan and then testing it and making sure you involve the right people. Revisit the contract and the SLA on a regular basis. Companies change. Now, I knew that, but I just hadn't really thought about it in the context of web hosting. I mean, we've had a lot of companies that support us with hardware and software, things like swapping storage devices out and servers out and other things. And a lot of those companies I've dealt with for over a decade. And I've known that Company A was bought by Company B, and Company A was great to work with, but Company B isn't so hot. Well, that changes, and you've been through the same experience. Well, the same thing will happen with your cloud provider. They will change over time. They'll be bought out, their philosophy will change, they'll become so large that they can no longer give you the kind of service that you were getting a year or two ago. So revisit your service level agreement, your contracts on a regular basis. Sometimes we get in a habit, and of course, we sign a contract every 6 months. This contract is renewed every 6 months. But you get in the habit of just writing the signature on it without looking at the details. How many of you have actually reviewed every single contract from your existing vendor every time it comes in? You know, I'm going to tell you, I hadn't. I do now. But I hadn't in the past because I thought, well, it's the same contract. I'm just going to sign it. I'm happy with it. Hey, I'll sign it. We're good. You know, no problem. No, things change, and you don't realize how much they change. If the vendor changes, is bought or sold, ask for a new contract and review it as if they are a new vendor. Very subtle things can affect you in a contract that you're not even aware of. Don't become complacent just because a company's been reliable in the past. There's no guarantee they're going to be reliable tomorrow. I've been in the technology business now, I think, for 35, 36 years. A lot of people working for me in technology, and I can tell you, if you're a manager, it's amazing how employees can change. I've had employees work for me who are the very best. Up to some point, something happens in their life or something happens with their attitude, and overnight, they're a different person. companies have exactly the same kind of personality changes. You may not realize it, but they do. I'll give you some additional recommendations here. Shannon has a document called Cloud Computing Contracting Considerations for Inclusion. It includes everything I said pretty much. I think I might have gone into a little bit more depth than she does in it, but in the technical stuff, but that's kind of it. It's kind of quick. I'm going to let you go early, but I thought you might have some questions. So whatever questions you got. Yes, sir.
I agree with everything you said. And our organization, we moved our entire data center section of our voice of RP system to the cloud in January. And we went with a local provider, a product cloud solution, one that we had a contract with since 2006. Very tight-knit fit. It's the BC3. They're also here exhibiting. And it took us about 6 months to go through that contract to the point where our relationship was strained because of some of the things that were generic in their minds language. And through the help of the document that you're talking about from Shannon, had some of these items in there. One in particular was about data breaches. So special circumstance in there. Yeah, we wanted to be notified of any data breach in the data center, what the remedy was, and what the impact was. And they said, well, that's not normally our business practice. We were not going to sign that contract without those things in there. Keeping the data in the continental United States, a lot of those types of things. So it changed our mindset of how we sign any contract.
There are several things in the document. I'll cover just a few that are very critical. One is you need to identify very clearly who owns the data. You own the data. You need to identify how often you need to access it and what control you have. And I'm telling you, you need to lay down the law and say, that data belongs to me. I need access to it when I need it, no matter how often that is, no matter how long that is. As long as I'm your customer, I have to have immediate access to the data. I don't want reports. I want access to the raw data for that. I want access to everything on the site that belongs to me. Not interested in your software, not interested in your hardware, but I'm interested in that data because that data belongs to me. Now, Ryan brought up data breaches, and that's a very good point. You are responsible for your data. Ultimately, you will be held responsible. However, you can mitigate that responsibility through good contract information and at least provide information to a court or to whoever you answer to. In some cases, it could be a suit, particularly if you do a sensitive data breach. But whoever you are responsible to, you can at least prove to them that you did due diligence. You can't prevent every breach of data. It's almost impossible to do that. But the courts and whoever you report to are going to expect that you have at least done due diligence and doing the best that you can. I often tell my staff, the only secure computer is the one that's not plugged anything into anything, turned off and in my pocket, with my 45 on the other side. That's about the way the world is today. So, I mean, there's no such thing as 100% security. 95% is doing really well, and that last 5% will cost you as much as the first 95%. So that's just a good rule to follow. It's like good data. No database has all good data in it. You do good to get 95% correct data. There's a difference between good data and correct data. So keep that in mind. One of the other things that's important is watch for escalating prices. That's one of the things I've seen in at least half a dozen contracts. And some companies will put absolutely phenomenal escalating contracts in, things that you don't even think about. They'll say, well, we're going to sign a 3-year contract. But then buried down in the text, it says, well, if our costs go up, your costs go up correspondingly. The other thing you need to worry about is failures. If the system fails, if there is a natural disaster or something else, is it their responsibility to recover the data? Do they pay the recovery costs? Other things like that. So all those are in the document. I would recommend that you read it, look at it, and make sure that your contracts do that. It's also important to do tests on a regular basis. Backups are only as good as the restore. I'll tell you a story about that. About 15 years ago, Floyd, 1999, my staff and I went over and helped the town of Princeville after the flood over there. And we helped rebuild the network in the city hall. And actually, SAS donated some computers, and we hooked them up, wired them up and so forth. A couple of servers got ready to restore the data. The data backup wasn't working. There was no data on the tape that had the backup. Now, they had religiously put that tape in every day. Somebody had pressed the button that said back up the data, but nobody had ever tested to restore it. They lost every piece of data that they had. Now, they were able to go back and recover some from local hard drives and things like that, but it was, I can tell you, it was a disaster, no pun intended, that they lost that. So your backup is only as good as your restore. For years, I wrote code as a programmer, and I had a programmer work for me one time who felt like that as long as a program compiled cleanly, that he was done. And I developed a mantra at that point, and I'll tell you what it is. Every programmer who's ever worked for me, I make the comment, if you write a program, you're going to have to add those numbers up with a calculator at least once. You always test your output in that way, because you never know. Just because you get output doesn't mean it's right. So the same way with the backup. Just because you get a backup, and the device says the tape completed normal, this person got this normal completion every day. But when we got ready to restore the data, there was nothing on the tape. So keep that in mind. Any other questions? Yes?
Did you include any penalties or incentives?
Pardon me?
Did you include penalties or incentives?
We do. One of them is cost recovery of particularly staff time that's involved. We get either a discount, and I've done it both ways, either direct cost, some rebate back. Make sure that you include in there the payment criteria. You want to check, you want them to give you the next 40 years of credit, what do you want, you know? But make sure you get that spelled out, because it's very easy to get that buried somewhere. Now, your legal staff are going to tell you a lot about things like limit of liability and all the other stuff. Let them do their job there. I don't really get involved in that, but one of the clauses that I found in the contract that I got was one of the companies I talked to took no liability for the data. If the data got damaged, you were on your own. Whether they damaged it or not, that was, quote, an act of God. Well, it's not an act of God if your computer malfunctioned because you didn't replace the hardware. Well, maybe it is, but it's not in the same term as a tornado or lightning would be. So make sure that you talk about those terms and conditions and what they mean. So we put clauses in that basically talk about that. Who pays? I will tell you that I have not collected from my hosting company that caused this problem yet because I haven't switched. But they will be getting a very large bill just as soon as I get my website moved over. I can't send them a bill right now because they still have my website. I don't make somebody mad and have them go and flip the switch. What the heck? What's 11 grand? Let them sue us. I can't do that. So again, you walk a fine line there, but I will guarantee you the day that I flip the switch on my new site and have everything backed up and everything's up and running, they're going to get a very big bill. They're not only going to get billed for, and I'm prepared to go to court over it. I've already talked to our town attorneys, and we're prepared to take them to court. Because of that $11,000, actually it was almost $13,000 total by the time all the FedEx fees were paid and everything, and the time that my staff had to spend getting things back up and running, just because one of their employees didn't do his job. So that's what you have to look at and make sure that you're covered in that. Another company had an escalation clause in it that said, if our power goes up, if our telco goes up, we are allowed to pass that cost on to you. And yet I'm signing a three-year contract. I said, you know, if I buy a car and I agree to pay for it for 3 years and the car company's prices go up, my car payments don't go up. You know, that way. So there's something out of this here. So that's a clause that I struck entirely. Now keep in mind that most of the contracts you get are the absolute best for the company. And you need to go in understanding that there's not a thing in that contract that's not negotiable. Every single word in it is negotiable. The other thing you have to be careful is venue. A lot of cases have come out recently that where the venue for legal action is based on where the data lives. Shannon will point that out in her document. So if the hosting company is in Phoenix, Arizona law takes over. But I don't know if you're aware or not that North Carolina contracting law voids contracts for local governments that have the venue anywhere other than the county and state that the government's located in. I can't sign a contract with a venue other than Wake County, North Carolina. Contract's null and void if I do. So you need to think about that, because that's one of those points of contention that you're gonna find out. So it is right if you go in and change it in the contract. But if you don't change it in the contract, or it's not in the contract, by default, it goes to where the data resides. So make sure that you specify that the legal venue for this contract is the state of North Carolina and whatever jurisdiction you live in. Your contract. Okay, any other questions? Well, good luck.
We'll be calling you.
You can have it. I've got a redacted copy where I take it. But it's just posted yet. Because I don't want to release the name until I get my legal stuff taken care of. But it has everything redacted. I've made a copy of that for that reason, so that if